Thank you, everybody, and good evening. It's a real pleasure to be here with Ev to kick off Wisdom 2.0.
It's an honor.
And as I was thinking about how to begin, I came across this story as I was watching someone deliver a commencement address at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln.
Like you do.
Kind of. And there was a reference to a place called the Conestoga Mall in Grand Island, Nebraska. So, Ev, I want you to weave in for me why that place is significant to you, and then you find a blogger, Twitter, and now Medium. Were you always this way? I mean, did you like build stuff with mom and dad on the farm in Clark's? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I grew up literally on a farm in the middle of the cornfields, outside a town of 400 people, going to school in a class of 12 to 14 people, pre-internet. And so I was kind of forced to build things to entertain myself. But I seemed to be wired that way, so I was always building whatever. From a young age, it was Legos and blocks, and as I got older, it was in the shop trying to build bikes and skateboards. Yeah. Most of the things I tried to build were entirely impractical, and I had no idea what I was doing. I tried to build a car because I really wanted to get off the farm and go to town. I thought somehow with all these tractor parts and motors and things, I should be able to build a car. That didn't work. But as I got older, it turned a little bit more virtual, my creations. Eventually, I learned to program in school. I was very fortunate that we had a mandatory programming class in rural Nebraska. Before that, I really wanted to make video games, so I drew them on paper, and I designed a lot of video games on paper that were pretty cool, I think. As I got older and after I had learned to program, getting back to the Conestoga Mall. So Grand Island, I'm sure there are a lot of people who know the geography of Nebraska really well here, but Grand Island is...
Give it up.
Yeah. It's like the third biggest city in Nebraska. It was about 35 miles from where I grew up. So that's where we would go. That's where they had a mall and a movie theater and a roller skating rink. So it was in high school there I would go to the newsstand. I love bookstores and I love newsstands. And I found around that age that was sort of the outlet to the world. Again, pre-internet, wanting to learn things, wanting to expand my ideas and knowledge, I found, oh, you can read things, and they will tell you what's going on in the rest of the world, and that was fascinating to me. So I spent a lot of time in bookstores, in the mall, in the newsstand, and the story I told in this that you're referring to is one day I went to this mall, and there was this magazine I hadn't seen before, and I picked it up, and it was a window into the future. And it was really a window into San Francisco in the early 90s that was building the future. And that was Wired magazine, and it was the second issue of Wired magazine, and I picked that up, and it had these neon colors and this funky type, and they were using this terminology like I mostly didn't understand, but it was written in a way that assumed you were part of the club. And I was like, damn, I want to be part of this club. This is what I want to, this is where I want to be.
Yeah. And that article that you referenced was about this wonderful idea of essentially connecting human brains and ideas. And the way you talked about it was just growing up on a farm where you needed to have an outlet to have your idea for someone else and to share and to connect. How did that then turn into Blogger and then Twitter and now Medium?
Yeah, so that idea captivated me, this idea of sharing knowledge and ideas and connecting and getting, it was the amplification of that notion that you could, by reading, you could expand your worldview and times infinite. and instantaneous. And so I already had an affinity for computers, but they weren't very connected. So I signed up for online services and so forth. But the short version is I've been trying to connect brains ever since. There was a few things in the middle, but that's always what excited me about the internet, is that idea of connecting brains. And we take a lot of that for granted now, that you can have a thought and put it on the internet, and most of the rest of the world, at least a good part of the world, has access to that. I think I almost still get chills when thinking about the reality of that, which wasn't true when we were born, and now it's true, and nothing is the same because of that. And so most of my companies, in fact, all of them have really been about trying to make that better.
Yeah. And you described it as essentially, imagine if we built this giant idea-sharing machine. But it was also informed by the notion that if there were people out there sharing their good ideas, they would overwhelm the bad ideas. They would win the day.
That was the idea.
That was the idea. Tell me when, what was the moment or moments where the idea ran into the reality?
I'm still not sure what the reality is.
Yeah.
I know it's more complicated than I originally thought. Which was that. It was, well, once anyone can share their thoughts, I'm still an optimist by nature, and an optimist about human nature. And so I think we may get there. But for most of my career, and I think for a lot of us technologists, the assumption was good things would happen. And overwhelmingly good things would happen. Of course, we knew some bad things would happen. And within the last few years, I think it's been demonstrated that we may have underestimated the bad things. Or I don't think we overestimated the good things. I think we underestimated the bad things. There's just more things. And I think we were maybe thought the overwhelmingly good things would happen a little sooner. It's a lot messier than we thought, than I thought. Yeah, so I don't know if there's a moment, but it's been an accumulation of data.
There was a profile of you in 2017 or 18 by the New York Times, and the headline, as there want to be, was "The Internet is Broken."
That's true.
And essentially then it was a description of how you, Ev Williams, especially via Medium, are beginning to think about perhaps not fixing it, but to balance it off a little bit. Talk a little bit about that.
We're trying. So I always hesitate when this is referenced, because I don't want to set myself up as trying to fix the internet. That seems that seems hard. And we're a tiny part of the internet, even what we're working on. If what you described, one vision of the internet is a giant idea exchange machine, it's also a convenience store and many other things that are kind of unrelated. So I always think it's so woven throughout society. But the thing that I go back to is this notion of making useful things. So going back to being an optimist, I mean, obviously we're dealing with an unprecedented number of catastrophes and near catastrophes in the world right now. And things are more uncertain than I'm sure they've ever been. And it's really scary. And I think there are solutions, or at least good ideas, to most problems, whether they be personal or global. It's sort of like that William Gibson quote that the future's already here and just not evenly distributed. I believe the solution is here and just not evenly distributed. There are great ideas and great knowledge and great wisdom that exists in the world in someone's mind that can help other people through almost anything. And the internet allows that to be exchanged. And so when I say the internet is broken, I mean, that again was why I was excited about it. It's broken at that function. Like that function it's gotten worse over time, not better, because we've become, for a whole bunch of reasons, and it's systemic. And the problem I focus on is what information gets put out in the world and how does it get disseminated and in front of people and what takes people's attention, which is a good thing to be talking about at this conference. It's all about attention and where we spend our attention. And our attention has been hijacked. And it's primarily been hijacked by advertising-driven business models that are not driven to make us more wise. That's not their purpose. And that determines, to a large extent, what propagates up in our feeds and on our screens, and that's this massive, massive system that is working at cross purposes with what most of us want and need.
So, when you think about your, let's begin with your meditation practice, your mindfulness practice. And then I want to come back to, because what you just described is in some ways the antithesis. It is the way the system is set up right now. It is the opposite in every single way of meditation in a practice rooted in mindfulness. Where did you come to mindfulness? Tell us a little bit about that first.
So, the original introduction was probably 20-some years ago. There's a period after my first company failed that I went back to the farm and lived with my dad, and my parents had gotten divorced, and he, I have no idea how, but was introduced to Wayne Dyer and Deepak Chopra, like tapes.
In Clarks, Nebraska.
In Clarks, Nebraska. And he's a farmer, Nebraskan farmer dude, and he was listening to these tapes, and he was like, "Oh, these are pretty cool," and meditating. And I was like, "I'll listen," and I thought they were pretty cool too. And I was like, that was really my introduction, was these cassette tapes. And I listened to them quite a bit. And I didn't really develop a formal practice, but it was a lot of related ideas. And then, and I kind of went back to it for many years, probably a decade or more, where I would, especially in times of stress or in times of just various times throughout my life, where I would meditate in the way that I learned how through those, and I found it powerful and useful. And then, but I didn't develop a practice until about 5 or 6 years ago, when an advisor at Medium, actually, we had an offsite, and we had a guide there who did some meditations, and I was like, oh. And I think I was just in a when the student is ready sort of mode.
Right.
And that struck me pretty profoundly, and I said, I need to keep doing this. How do I keep doing this? How do I fit this into my life? And I think for so many of us, that's the hard question. It's very, very practical, like, how do I actually do it? What time of day, when, where, is there a room in my house where I can? And so I thought, what would be a good forcing function is if I had someone come to work. And so through this same connection, we're super fortunate to have Will Kabat-Zinn come into our work and start working with us there. And I started doing it at work, and that changed it. That got the habit going, and then have been doing it pretty regularly ever since. And it's been just profound.
So now tying it back to the way you just described, essentially an industry in many ways that is an attention-grabbing industry. That is the antithesis of what you just described. As someone who has built amazing companies, how do you see mindfulness as a solution to or integrate it into actual product or product design to try to bring us away from the lack of attention to an awareness and being present and discerning. Because you can attack it now, you've seen both sides. So how do you think about this?
I look at a couple different layers of it. One is trying to just work myself and on my practice and mindfulness and being, just to make better decisions and to get less caught up in the urgency in the day-to-day that is so easy to get caught up in when you're building things and when there's pressure and the expectations are high. And part of that is about, I think for me, mindfulness has helped me take a much longer view on things. And when I look back at companies or products that I've worked on, like a lot of my worst decisions have come out of fear. And I think there's a lot of well-meaning people who build things or in Silicon Valley who are scared that they will fail, and therefore they do things that they might not feel are the best possible thing for say for their customers or whoever is using their thing. And analogy I like to use is just thinking about food and information and how we all know if there's a bunch of junk food in front of us, and especially at the end of a long day and our defenses are down, we're very likely to consume that. And we're not necessarily going to feel good about it. And if we felt that way every time, if we went to a particular place, we may consume a lot of their food until we stop going. And so the way I relate that back to the products we build in these information services is you can build something that's incredibly addictive, but people generally know better. I mean, everyone goes through their process of you get out of the house and you can buy the ho-hos with your own dime, and then you can OD on those, and then you go like, oh, maybe I don't want to live with that. I feel like as a society, is this making sense still? Yeah. The analogy. So as a society,
ho-hos connect people like crazy.
Is Ho-Ho a sponsor of the company? We're sort of getting over the sugar high that these information systems have injected into our brains, and we're still we can still fall into the same traps, just like if you put the junk food in front of us, but we can also know better. And so there's a period where it appeals to our base instincts, and it gets very good at exploiting our survival instincts of fear and novelty and FOMO. And when you don't know better, then you're completely wrapped up in that. And then as you start to know better, which mindfulness is, of course, helpful for, then you can still say, like, oh, I'm being pulled into that, but it's not actually how I want to live or how I want to work. And I feel like just as a lot of the world has gotten more healthy, and there's a ton of world, I don't think it's going to be simple. I don't think there's going to be this major transformation of society where, like, oh, we don't want, cheap, superficial content, but I do think there's more and more people who are going to consciously make the choice that actually I want something healthier, I want something better, I want something better for me and for the world. And as that happens, there's going to be opportunities open up for people who aren't appealing to the base instincts to really build businesses and to build healthier products.
Oh, that's great. And hopeful. So as we wrap up our time here, this is the 10th anniversary of Wisdom. You came 7 years ago, and there are a couple of thousand people here. And I think it's a testament to what you just described as the hunger and the need of the moment right now, to find an alternative to this immersive screen that can dominate a person's life every day. Tell us about where you see, Ev, the mindfulness movement going here in the country, as you've seen the growth over the past 10 years?
I think it's very exciting. I mean, I don't have a great view on the whole movement or the whole country, but first of all, huge congrats to Soren and team for the 10 years. That's incredible. And the success has been, yeah. It's very gratifying and exciting to see this sort of turnout and this sort of energy. And my own experience in Silicon Valley is, and among other circles, that the expectation, like even in the short time since I spoke here last, just the mainstreamness of conversations around meditation and mindfulness has been pretty dramatic. I mean, we were a little bit weird when we started having meditation in the office 5 or 6 years ago, or if I was at an event or speaking or press or anything and mention, or even just at a dinner party mention meditation, be like, are they going to think, you know, maybe that's still a little bit edgy or weird? And now I don't feel any of that at all. My expectation amongst, you know, certain crowds and people I know is, yeah, of course you meditate. What, you don't meditate? That'd be
right.
It's kind of weirdo over here. Doesn't meditate.
In a very non-judgmental way.
Yeah. David meditates, by the way.
In a very judgmental way.
Yeah. He's cool.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ev Williams.
Thanks for having me.